Hi, this is Chris Hoy. I want to thank you for joining me for this acrylic painting tutorial. I'm going to be showing you today how to create easy faux verdigris, perfect to use in backgrounds, but we're going to be adding a twist. And you'll be able to take this technique into a lot of different areas of your painting world. So let's get started. This is actually the design that I created that inspired me to think about trying to figure out how to create this unique background. And the original piece I painted on was actually a piece of verdigris metal. Loved the way it looked with this design. The colors were perfect. So when that surface was no longer available, I decided to play around and try to create that faux look of verdigris and see what I came up with. And I absolutely love it. I've used it in a lot of different areas and we'll talk about that today, but let's get started with the actual painting of this and learning how to create this. It's really very, very simple. You just need a few tools, and one of the tools you're going to need is a mister. I love this distress sprayer because the spray that comes out is just a super fine mist. And just FYI, everything that we're using is available at cdwood.com, and I'll put a link below. But this mister is my favorite. I've used it for several years now and absolutely love it. The other thing we're going to need is a sea sponge. Now there's different kinds of sea sponge. This one is called silk, and I think it's because it has little smooth, it's more of a silky looking sponge. This one is wool, and you can see by the texture in this that it does have a lot of texture, and by using this we're also going to get a lot of texture. That's what I want to go with. This one is good for other things, but not intended for what we're using today. Now, I like to kind of grip my sponge and look at the tip of it to see, you can tell what kind of texture you're going to get. Now, I'm dipping it in the water because it has to be very soft, and it is wet. You can see when I touch it, I do have a lot of moisture on my fingers. Let me get a paper towel. The surface is dry. Now, I'm going to show you what happens if you do use a dry surface. I am starting out with Mississippi mud. That's going to be our first color. And let me scoot my palette over a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to get a good grip on my sponge so it kind of fans out. And I can get that texture so that I have really good control on that. This is, again, really wet, and I'm going to tap it in my palette so that I disperse the paint kind of evenly across the tips of the sponge. So I don't want to just get a glob on there. And if you touch it, you're going to get that sort of fanned out look. Now, if I take this, I'm just going to put a paper towel under it here. If I take and kind of apply it to this surface, I get a really nice look, but I don't want that really dark, specific texture. So this is not what we're going to go with. I want a very soft texture. In order to achieve that, I'm going to take my mister, and I am misting this surface really pretty heavily. I don't want it drippy wet, but look what happens when I start to put that sponge on there. Can you see the difference between that really harsh? This is kind of soft and muted and just blends very nicely on that water. And I can I'm going to add just a little more water on that sponge. I can take and go over it until I'm happy with it. I can add more water. I can soften it if I think it's too strong. until I get just a very nice, oh, I almost want to call it a marbling of color on there. And you can see what a huge difference, dry and wet. Look how beautiful that just blends. To me, this almost looks like a very soft piece of granite. Now, one of the key things in this technique is the amount of moisture that you use. So you need to be working with a very fluid surface and palette. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to switch over. This one is perfectly dry. And we're going to move on to the next stage. And this whole technique is achieved by adding layers of color. I am using antique green. Just going to get a little puddle right here. And plantation pine. And add a little puddle next to that. And we'll talk about colors in a minute. So now that I have, I'm going to clean my sponge out here, rinse the water out. Now that I have the colors on my palette, I'm going to grab my sponge again. And I forgot to mention when I applied the colors that I didn't take my sponge and go samey, 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 samey. I've kind of rotated my wrist. Now you can't swirl your sponge or you'll get a mess. So we're just tapping, moving, so that your wrist is in constant motion, but once you touch, you just touch down and lift up. So now that I have these two colors on my palette, I'm going to mist my surface again because I want that same soft, fluid movement of paint. Going to get a little bit of antique green and a little bit of plantation pine. So I have my sponge double loaded. Both colors. Now when I tap it out on my palette, I want to see just a very soft imprint, not real heavy. Going to do the same thing that I did with the Mississippi mud. Just going to touch, move, and just lightly add that color. Now, if I think it's a little bit too strong, I'm going to tap it out on my palette and just repeat until I get it lightened up. I can also take and add a little moisture to that and hit it with a clean part of the sponge to softly dampen it. What's so much fun about this technique is there's absolutely no wrong way. Not real fond of that dark area. So I'm just going to go in with the clean part of the sponge and go over that. It's kind of hard to see with all that underneath. But look at that. Almost, I still think that really is reminiscent of granite. Just so very pretty. You can play with it as much as you want. However, you need to know that if you overdo your tapping, and you go over it too much, it soon starts to blend and muddy up. You know what I mean? It just you work it too much, you're going to lose that two-tone effect. Now when this dries, you're going to get just a little bit lighter color. So I have another one here that I did prior, and it is very dry. Now when I did, let me go back to this piece here for a second. When I did the chickadee, or I'm sorry, the goldfinch, this color that I currently have was just too vivid and too bright. So I decided I would go back, and I'm getting just a little bit of Mississippi mud, and that was the first color that I started with. So I'm just going to use I love this 3/4 inch oval wash. It's a very soft bristle, and I'm going to just add a hint of color on here. So I'm just going to load my brush. Very, very thin wash of color. And I'm going to start on the outside and just kind of slap that on and work it in so that my color is a little heavier on the outer edges, lighter toward the center. And this is where you can add as much or as little as you like, but you can see how that really tones it down, gives it that nice, rich look to it. So we have gone from, oops, let's back out a little bit. This was light buttermilk with the Mississippi mud. Then double load the sponge and add the antique green and plantation pine. And then a wash of Mississippi mud over top. And I actually think all three of these look great. But this one was what I was looking for the background. And I did another one, so this one is perfectly dry. Grab a paper towel. I needed to add just, if you look at the finished one here, it has a little bit of speckling in the background. So I needed to add just a little bit of different type of texture. And this really will break that up and make it look a little more realistic. I am using my splatter brush. Love this. Just going to get the tips of it a little bit wet. Just going to tap it into soft black. And I can give it a little test here to see what kind of splatter I'm getting, which is perfect. The thinner the paint, the bigger the splatters. And I'll just go ahead and add a little bit of speckling to that. And I think that just absolutely looks amazing. If you think your speckles are too harsh, let me zoom in a little bit. You can even go in, look how great that looks. I mean, that is amazing. I think it's just beautiful. If you think the speckles are too harsh, you can go in with a paper towel and kind of blot them. It's going to soften it down. Or you can simply take a little bit of water and mist it and kind of let them just, this might be a little bit too dry, but they'll start to kind of not puddle out, but they softly mute around the edges. And you can see how they're starting to blend out just a little bit. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so this is just one example of this technique. So after I created this, I thought it turned out so nice that I decided I really wanted to try something else with this. So I had this is a metal bucket that I painted, and I love the color of this. Now you can tell this is a totally different kind of background. So instead of using the light buttermilk base, I changed it over because I thought this looked kind of blue. And so, let me see if I can go out just a little, go out the wrong way here. So this is the background that I created, and I think it really is very, very similar. I don't know if I can zoom in to see how close those colors match. I love this. I thought, okay, so this was a metal bucket that I can no longer get, but I could still do this same design and get that same look. So then my mind got to thinking, okay, so if we could do that in blues, what would happen if I did that in browns. So I did this. I love this. To me, this almost looks like leather. And I just used more moisture so I didn't have nearly as much texture, but I used all brown undertones. I don't know if we can zoom in a little bit, and you can see how, let me go back up just a little more. There we go. You can see how this just has enough soft design in it. Well, I keep going the wrong way here, I'm sorry. To give that look of leather. I love the way this turned out. And then I got to thinking, okay, so we've done this with the greens, we've done it with the browns, I've added a little bit of blue. So what would happen if I went with color? So I did some Halloween pieces. I had so much fun. I think they turned out great. This is orange and purple. Aren't those fun? Look at that background. All those colors in there. I think you can go in and see all that movement in the background. So much better than just a solid plain color. Let me go back out again. Okay, I'm making you all dizzy, I'm sorry. Okay, so there's purple and orange, and then I did green and blue. So look at these. These are just absolutely wonderful. I think this technique, to me, by doing Halloween, it just looks kind of magical and mystical. And with those different colors, I really was only going to do 3 ornaments, but I had so much fun, I had to do more colors. So that ended up being a bigger project than I had originally intended. And another one that I did, I thought turned out really well. I thought this one almost looked like stone. And I did use some stencils in there. Okay, go out a little bit. I did a little bit of the chip paint edging, but look at all the splatters. And I can go back in, you can see all that. I did put some orange in there just to brighten it up. And I went ahead and splattered it not only with the black dark colors, but also with the light buttermilk or the white. So I just thought this turned out so unique. It's such a fun technique. So I hope this gives you some ideas on how to use the these are our different stages, again, with the Verdigris. And just by changing up the colors, using different colors, the different looks that can be achieved, I just think you're going to have so much fun with this technique. So everything that I've used today is available at cdwood.com. You can check there for all the supplies, and I will list them below. But I want to thank you for watching me today. I hope that you learned some new tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting life a little bit easier, a lot more fun, and a lot less stressful. So thank you for joining me. Remember, cdwood.com. Be sure to share with your friends, like, and subscribe. So thank you again for joining me. We'll see you next time on Create with Chris.